What if the most profound power you could ever possess is the one that makes you invisible to the world's chaos, yet unmistakably present to its truth? What if the quiet architecture of your inner world could exert a force more real than any outward display of authority? And what if that very force, by its nature, could feel like a threat to others? By the end of our time together, you will not only understand this paradox, but you will hold the blueprint for that architecture. You will see how a life built on an ancient, battle-tested philosophy can grant you a form of gravity, a centeredness so profound that it silently and irrevocably alters every room you enter. Before we proceed, let us be clear. What follows is a philosophical exploration, a training ground for the mind and spirit, drawn from the wisdom of the ancient Stoics. It is not, and should not be mistaken for, medical, psychological, or legal counsel. The principles discussed are tools for reflection, not prescriptions for personal crises. For those, you must always consult qualified professionals. Our work here is to examine the foundations of a resilient life, so that you may build your own with wisdom and care. You may have encountered a modern idea, a notion of a personal aura, or an energetic field so potent it can unsettle those around you. It speaks of a magnetism born not of charisma or status, but of some ineffable quality of being. The language is often mystical, but the phenomenon it describes is real. The Stoics, however, would approach it not with superstition, but with surgical precision. They would have a different name for it. They would call it the consequence of times irritates, times of moral excellence, of a soul in harmony with reason and nature. This presence is not an energy you project. It is the shadow cast by a life lived in accordance with virtue. It is the silent resonance of a mind that has been meticulously engineered to distinguish what is within its control from what is not. And this distinction, this single powerful cut of the intellectual sword, is the beginning of all freedom and all true power. The ancient philosophers understood that the world bombards us with impressions, events, and the actions of other people. The undisciplined mind is a slave to these externals. It is elated by praise, crushed by criticism, angered by inconvenience, and terrified by loss. It is a ship without a rudder, at the mercy of every passing storm. The Stoic, by contrast, is the captain of their vessel. They cannot control the storm, the economy, the opinions of others, illness, or the relentless march of time. These things are, in the Stoic lexicon, asterisk, indifference, asterisk. They are external to our moral character, but the captain can control the ship. They can control their responses, their judgments, their actions. They can set the sails, man the rudder, and navigate with skill and courage, no matter the weather. This internal command center, this faculty of reasoned choice, is what the Greeks called times proheresis asterisk. It is the only thing that is truly ours. When a person dedicates their life to polishing this faculty, to aligning their will with nature, something remarkable happens. Their inner world becomes an ordered, coherent, and tranquil place. They cease to be a battlefield of conflicting desires, fears, and appetites. They develop an inner citadel, a fortress of the mind that external events cannot breach. This internal coherence is what others sense. It is not a mystical aura. It is the profound and often unsettling quiet of a soul that is at peace with itself and with the rational order of the universe. Why then is this presence so often disturbing to others? Because in a world of pervasive anxiety, of frantic seeking for external validation, tranquility is a rebellion, authenticity is an accusation. A person who does not need your approval, who is not swayed by your anger, and who sees reality without the distortions of fear or desire, becomes a living mirror. And what many see in that mirror is not a reflection of you, but a reflection of their own inner chaos, their own compromises, their own neglected potential. They are not reacting to you, They are reacting to the dissonance between your inner state and their own. Your calm illuminates their turmoil. Your integrity highlights their pretense. Your freedom underscores their self-imposed chains. This is not your intention. The goal of the Stoic is not to intimidate or to provoke. It is to live well, to be a good and useful member of the human community. But the presence of a well-ordered mind acts like a tuning fork. When struck, it produces a clear, true note. In a room full of out-of-tune instruments, that single, pure tone can be jarring. It reveals the discord. It does not create it. It merely exposes what is already there. Consider the dynamic in a corporate boardroom. There is a man, let us call him Julian, a senior executive celebrated for his relentless drive and his power to command a room. His presence is electric, forceful. He speaks, and others fall silent. He sets a direction, and armies of employees mobilize. To the outside observer, he is the epitome of power. But Julian's internal world is a tyranny of insecurity. His entire sense of self is built upon the shifting sands of quarterly reports and the praise of his superiors. A word of criticism sends him into a spiral of sleepless nights. The prospect of a competitor's success feels like a personal wound. He does not command a room. He desperately placates his own fear by controlling the variables within it. His power is a brittle shell, a defense mechanism against a terror of being found wanting. He is a king who is a slave to the opinions of his own courtiers. Now, into this same room walks another figure, a woman named Sophia. She is a mid-level strategist, quiet and observant. She does not seek the spotlight. She speaks less often than others, but when she does, her words are grounded in reason and evidence, untainted by ego or fear. She has practiced, for years, the discipline of separating events from her judgments about them. When a project fails, she does not see it as a reflection of her worth, but as an event from which to learn. When a colleague is promoted over her, she feels a fleeting sting of disappointment and natural first impression, but her trained reason quickly intervenes. She reminds herself that promotions are external things, governed by factors beyond her control. Her work is to perform her duties with excellence and integrity. That is her domain. The rest is not. Sophia's presence is not loud, but it is heavy. It has a kind of gravity. When Julian unleashes a tirade of blame after a setback, the others in the room shrink, caught in the emotional storm. Sophia remains centered. She does not absorb his anger. She does not react to his fear. She simply waits for the storm to pass, and then, in the ensuing silence, she calmly asks, "What can we learn from this, and what is our next indicated action?" In that moment, her quiet question is more powerful than Julian's entire performance of rage. It is disturbing to him. It robs his anger of its fuel because it refuses to participate in the drama. It is unsettling to some of her colleagues who are accustomed to navigating the world through social maneuvering and emotional displays. Sophia's calm rationality feels alien, even cold, but to a few, her presence is a source of profound relief. It is a quiet anchor in a turbulent sea. She has not done anything times to times them. She has simply times been times herself, a self forged in the fires of inner discipline. She has built the inner citadel, and its silent, sturdy walls change the very landscape around it. This is the first sign. Your tranquility becomes a form of confrontation. You do not need to speak of philosophy. You do not need to argue or preach. Your very state of being, your lack of reactivity, your refusal to be drawn into needless drama, serves as an unspoken question to those around you. Why are you choosing to suffer over things you cannot control? This question, felt but not heard, can be deeply uncomfortable for someone whose identity is entangled with their own suffering. They may project onto you, calling you aloof, unfeeling, or arrogant. They are not describing you. They are describing the unfamiliar landscape of a mind at peace and their fear of it. They are like prisoners who have lived so long in a dark cell that the sudden appearance of sunlight is painful to their eyes. This leads directly to a second manifestation. You become a repository for confessions. People, strangers on a train, colleagues by the water cooler, friends in a moment of crisis, will find themselves telling you things they have never told another soul. This is not because you offer easy advice or comforting platitudes. In fact, you may offer very little. It is because the non-judgmental space you inhabit gives them permission to be vulnerable. Your inner citadel, while protecting you, becomes a sanctuary for others. They sense, instinctively, that you will not be shocked by their supposed failings or scandalized by their secrets. You see them as fellow human beings, contending with the same fundamental challenges of life. The Stoic knows that we are all prone to error, all subject to the sway of false judgments. As Seneca wrote, "We are like patients in a hospital ward, and the philosopher's school is the hospital." There is no room for arrogance when you understand the universal nature of the human condition. People feel this. They feel that their confession will be met not with judgment, but with a quiet, rational empathy. You are not holding up a scorecard. You are holding up that same calm mirror, and in it, they can finally look at themselves without the usual filters of shame and fear. Your presence doesn't fix their problems. It provides the stable ground upon which they can begin to fix themselves. This is a profound service, rendered not through action, but through being. I remember a man I once knew, a carpenter named Marcus. He had lived a hard life, marked by loss and labor. He was not a scholar, and he would have laughed at the title of philosopher. Yet, he was one of the truest Stoics I have ever met. He had an economy of motion and of speech. He wasted nothing. He did his work with a focused, present attention that was a form of meditation. One day, a young man from the city, whose expensive car had broken down, was waiting in Marcus's workshop while a part was being fetched. The young man was agitated, complaining about his ruined schedule, the incompetence of his assistant, the unfairness of it all. He was radiating a storm of frantic energy. Marcus just kept working, planing a piece of wood. The rhythmic, scraping sound was the only reply. After several minutes of this, the young man's tirade petered out into an anxious silence. He watched Marcus's hands, the steady, patient unfolding of his craft. Finally, the young man said, almost in a whisper, "My father died last month. I've been running ever since. I don't know how to stop." Marcus finished his pass with the plane, checked the edge with his thumb, and then looked at the young man for the first time. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss." He just nodded slowly and said, "The wood knows. You can't rush it. You have to find the grain and follow it." That was all. But in that moment, he had given the young man something more valuable than sympathy. He had given him a metaphor for life. He had reflected back to him the wisdom of nature itself, that there is an order to things, a grain to be followed, and that fighting it only leads to exhaustion and splintering. The young man's agitation had shattered against the carpenter's quiet coherence. The disturbance was not created by Marcus. It was a crisis within the young man, a fever that broke in the presence of a profound and simple health. This brings us to a crucial distinction. The world is full of people who intentionally cultivate an intimidating persona. They use silence as a weapon, a tool for manipulation. This is the way of the tyrant, not the sage. A person building their power on Machiavellian principles studies the weaknesses of others to exploit them. They create unease to maintain control. The Stoics' effect is the opposite. It is unintentional. The unease felt by others is a byproduct, not a goal. The Stoics' aim is inner liberty, not outer dominance. Yet, paradoxically, this inner liberty often grants a far more stable and enduring form of influence. People may fear the tyrant, but they will seek out the sage when their world is falling apart. Fear is a temporary motivator. Trust, born from observing consistent virtue, is bedrock. Therefore, a third sign of this deep-seated character is that you begin to attract challenges and responsibilities you do not seek. People will instinctively turn to you in a crisis, not because you are the designated leader, but because you are the calmest person in the room. In the chaos of a sudden emergency, when others are panicking, when their judgments are running wild, painting catastrophic pictures of the future, your mind remains anchored in the present moment, focused on a simple, powerful question: what is within my control right now? This ability to think clearly under pressure is a superpower. It is not an innate gift, it is the result of relentless training. The Stoics practiced this through exercises like the times premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. They would regularly and calmly contemplate the worst-case scenarios, losing their wealth, their health, their loved ones. The point was not to be morbid, but to mentally rehearse adversity, to strip it of its power to shock and paralyze. By facing these possibilities in their minds, they were inoculating themselves against the terror of the unknown. They were practicing for the storm in times of calm. So, when the real storm hits, while others are caught in the grip of their unexamined fears, you are already prepared. Your nervous system does not hijack your reason. You can see the path forward. You become the natural center of gravity. This can be a heavy burden. People will look to you to make decisions, to provide reassurance, to be the rock. The test for you, then, is to accept this responsibility without letting it inflate your ego. You must remember that your role is to serve the common good, to act with reason and courage, and that the outcome, ultimately, is not up to you. You are the archer, responsible for the perfect aim and the clean release. Whether the arrow hits the bullseye is in the hands of fate. This humility is the final, crucial layer of the inner citadel's defenses. A story of delayed awakening comes to mind. A woman named Elena, a brilliant surgeon whose hands were guided by immense skill, but whose life was ruled by a ferocious temper. In the operating theater, her control was absolute, her presence a whirlwind of demanding perfection. She saved lives, but she left a trail of bruised and fearful colleagues in her wake. Her identity was fused with her success. A surgical complication was not a medical event, it was a personal failure, an intolerable stain on her record. Her rage was a shield against the terror of fallibility. One day, a routine procedure went horribly wrong. A series of unforeseeable complications led to the patient's death on the table. In the aftermath, the hospital review cleared her of any error, but Elena could not clear herself. The event shattered her carefully constructed identity as the flawless surgeon. Her usual defense, anger, was useless. There was no one to blame. She was adrift in a sea of guilt and shame, her inner citadel revealed to be nothing but a facade. Her downfall was her awakening. Forced into a mandatory leave of absence, she had nothing but time and the deafening silence of her own mind. She began to walk for hours in the woods, the rhythm of her steps a slow counterpoint to the racing of her thoughts. She stumbled upon the writings of Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who, at the height of his power, wrote notes to himself about humility, duty, and accepting fate. She read his words not as ancient history, but as a lifeline. She began to see that her suffering came not from the patient's death, but from her arrogant judgment that she should have been able to control the uncontrollable. She had built her entire life on what was external, her reputation, her perfect record, the fear she inspired. The Stoic exercises taught her to rebuild on a new foundation. She started a simple journal, asking herself each evening, what did I do well today, according to my own values? Where did I let my judgments get the better of me? How can I do better tomorrow? It was a slow, arduous process of dismantling a lifetime of habit. When she finally returned to the hospital months later, she was a different person. The fierce, brittle energy was gone. In its place was a quiet, focused calm. She was still a brilliant surgeon, but her confidence was now rooted in her commitment to the process, not the outcome. She mentored younger doctors with patience. She listened to the concerns of her nurses. During a crisis, her voice was the calmest in the room. Some of her old colleagues were suspicious. They mistook her newfound tranquility for a lack of passion. They were disturbed by this new Elena, who no longer participated in the high-stakes drama of the surgical ward. But slowly, over time, the culture of her department began to shift. Her presence, forged in the crucible of her own failure, had become a new center of gravity, one based not on fear, but on a deep, earned, and humble strength. Elena had learned the hard way that the fortress we must build is not to keep the world out, but to create a space where we can properly meet it. This leads to a more subtle sign. You find yourself immune to flattery and unfazed by insults. The undisciplined mind is a beggar, constantly seeking the nourishment of praise and recoiling from the sting of criticism. It outsources its self-worth to the fleeting opinions of others. When you have done the work of building your own internal standards based on the virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, this dynamic simply falls away. When someone praises you, you can accept it graciously, but it does not touch your core. You know your own worth, which is based on your character and your actions, not their words. You can see the praise for what it is, an external event, a pleasant sound, but nothing more. It doesn't make you better than you are. Likewise, when someone insults you or criticizes you unfairly, it does not wound you. You can examine their words with rational detachment. Is there a kernel of truth in their criticism? If so, you can be grateful for the free lesson and use it to improve. As Epictetus would say, if they have hit upon one of your actual faults, you should thank them for their insight. If their criticism is entirely false, then why should a falsehood disturb your peace? It is simply an error, a noise made by another person struggling with their own false judgments. It is their problem, not yours. You would no more be angered by a false insult than you would by a dog barking at you as you walk down the street. It is simply what dogs do. This unreachability can be deeply frustrating to people who are used to controlling others through social reward and punishment. Your refusal to play the game of praise and blame can feel like a personal rejection. They dangle the bait of approval, and you do not bite. They brandish the weapon of disapproval, and you do not flinch. You have rendered their primary tools of social leverage useless. This is not an act of aggression on your part. It is simply a consequence of your inner freedom. You have declared your independence from the tyranny of opinion. For those who still live under its rule, your liberty is a bewildering and often infuriating spectacle. Finally, and perhaps most profoundly, your relationship with the world becomes one of deep connection, yet supreme detachment. This is the ultimate paradox of the Stoic path. By focusing intensely on your own inner state, you become more, not less, capable of serving others. By detaching yourself from outcomes you cannot control, you become more, not less, effective in your actions. The Stoic concept of times oikeiosis, times describes a process of expanding circles of concern. It begins with the self, but naturally extends outward to family, community, country, and eventually to all of humanity. The Stoic is no hermit. They are deeply embedded in the world, committed to their duties as a parent, a child, a neighbor, a citizen. They see every human being as a kinsman, a fellow actor in the great drama of life. Their actions are driven by a sense of duty and a rational love for humanity, what the Stoics called times philanthropia asterisk. But this love is disciplined. It is not the needy, grasping attachment that causes so much of our suffering. The Stoic loves their child, but they know that their child is mortal and not ultimately theirs to keep. They work for justice in their community, but they know that the final outcome of their efforts is not in their hands. They give themselves fully to the task at hand, to the role they are meant to play, but they maintain an inner reserve, a philosophical distance. They remember that they are an actor on a stage, and their job is to play their part well, whether it be the role of a king or a beggar. The quality of the performance is up to them, the plot of the play is not. This combination of deep engagement and serene detachment is the ultimate expression of the well-ordered soul. It allows you to love deeply without being destroyed by loss. It allows you to fight for what is right without being consumed by hatred or despair. It allows you to be fully present in the world, to feel its joys and sorrows without ever losing your inner peace. This is the state that others sense in you. It is a presence that is both deeply compassionate and unshakably solid. It is comforting because it is empathetic, and it is unsettling because it is free. It does not need anything from the world, and so it is able to give to the world without reservation. Let us return to the question we began with. The architecture of the inner world, when built upon these principles, exerts a quiet force. It is the force of a mountain, which does not need to announce its presence. Its sheer mass and stillness alter the weather patterns around it. So too does a soul grounded in Stoic virtue. Its coherence and tranquility alter the emotional and psychological climate of any space it occupies. The reason this can feel like a threat is because it challenges the fundamental assumptions by which many people live. The assumption that happiness depends on external circumstances, the assumption that our worth is determined by the opinions of others, the assumption that we are victims of our emotions. Your presence is a quiet, living refutation of these ideas. You are living proof that there is another way, a path of inner liberty, of radical self-possession, of profound and enduring peace. To walk this path is not easy. It is the work of a lifetime. It requires daily practice, constant vigilance, and the courage to face your own flaws and false judgments. But the reward is a prize beyond measure. It is not a powerful aura that impresses or intimidates others. That is a childish vanity. The true reward is freedom, the freedom to be a force for good in the world, untroubled by its chaos. The freedom to face whatever fate may bring with courage and equanimity. The freedom to be, in the words of Seneca, superior to all injuries and loved by all. So do not seek to have a powerful presence. Seek to have a virtuous character. Tend to the garden of your own mind. Lay each stone of your inner citadel with care and precision. The rest will follow, not as a goal to be achieved, but as a natural consequence. Your presence will not be a performance. It will be a simple reflection of the truth you have built within. And if that truth happens to disturb the comfortable falsehoods of others, you will meet their reaction not with pride or with fear, but with the same calm, rational compassion you apply to all things. You will remember that their turmoil is not your creation, and their peace is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to keep your own rudder true in the storm. We have spoken of the inner citadel and how its silent strength is perceived by the world. We have mapped its architecture, from the foundation of the dichotomy of control to the high towers of rational compassion. But building the fortress is only the first step. The next question becomes, how do we live from within it? How does a person with this internal stability manage the most precious external resource of all, time? How do they look upon their own mortality not as a source of terror, but as the ultimate motivator for a meaningful life? That is the next chapter of our journey. That is a conversation for another day.